What if you could make your conflicts constructive? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guests are Linda and Charlie Bloom. We're going to talk about arguing, and it all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California, Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast, and we're on UK Health Radio all weekend long. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, it's the interview portion of our show and welcoming our YouTube and Rumble viewers to the interview. And today we're going to talk about arguing, something that we all do way too much of, but it's part of life. And we've got two experts on relationships and marriages and arguing and all kinds of stuff. Linda and Charlie Bloom, they've been married since 1972, so I'm sure they're all about arguing. And making things work. They're trained as psychotherapists, relationship counselors. They've worked with individuals, couples, groups, organizations for decades, and they've lectured and taught at learning institutions throughout the US and internationally. They've authored 5 books, 101 Things I Wish I Knew When I Got Married, Secrets of Great Marriages, Happily Ever After, 39 Other Myths About Love, That Which Doesn't Kill Us, How One Couple Became Stronger at Broken Places. And today we're going to talk about their new book. It's called The End to Arguing, 101 Valuable Lessons for All Relationships. Welcome back to Guys Radio. Linda and Charlie Bloom, great to see you two.
It's great to see you too. Thank you so much for having us back.
My pleasure. So since you've been married since 1972, how do you define an argument versus a disagreement? And then how can we stop escalating those disagreements and turning them into arguments?
Yes, thank you for asking, because people are not clear usually about when it goes over the line from just being, a passionate interchange. And when you go over the line, you're trying to coerce the other person into seeing things differently or behaving differently. And that's grabbing too much ground. We want to just interact with each other in such a respectful way that we may agree to disagree, that the disagreements don't become disagreeable. They become disagreeable when you're trying to push somebody into something they don't want.
That's fun. I mean, just as an aside point, before we get started, you two are psychotherapists. You've been married since 1972. I can imagine the discussions and arguments and disagreements that take place and how your minds must work as psychotherapists as well as just everyday folks. Is that some type of interesting dynamic with that? Like, what did she say? What did she really mean? Is there a little spy versus spy thing going on there when you two guys get into it?
Yeah, well, you must be married to a psychotherapist. Yeah, it gets your tongue tied sometimes. Yeah, you just nailed it. That's exactly how it can be, and it's a mixed bag. Being married to somebody who is not only sharing your own field, but is sharing this field of being able to really look more deeply into people's motivation and to deal with it. And so, it can be challenging sometimes because we're both very skilled in the art of diagnosing each other and, putting them in a certain category. And we've had to learn how to disengage from that part of our brain that does that and kind of relate to each other as real people rather than as diagnostic cases.
I got it.
But it can be helpful, and you got to be careful not to see the other person as a client.
Now, we live in such polarizing times now, and I noticed some of the kind of facts you put in the book. U.S. has a very high divorce rate, 3rd in the world. I'm curious, number one, who's number 1 and who's number 2, and why is U.S. way up there? And do you think the political divisions and the whole fact of the matter that everything's so polarizing is part of the problem that we have here?
Oh, I definitely think so. And I think other countries do better because I don't think there's so highly materialistic, that people are devoting tremendous amount of time and effort and attention to enhancing their careers and making a mark professionally and accumulating wealth and building their portfolio. And so it's not really an intimacy oriented culture that we live in. It's much more about achievement, and the definition of success that most people have is about money and power and status and influence, not about the depth of connection with your partner and your children and your family members and your friends and family of choice. And so we have a formidable challenge, particularly in this country, to not go at effect of that prevailing view and put our attention and our time and effort in where we're going to get the biggest return for our investment. And all the people studying happiness, they've been studying happiness for 90 years all over the world. All the people that we respect in the positive psychology movement say the same thing. You get the biggest return for your efforts in the happiness and well-being department from your closest relationships.
Oh, that's fantastic. So who was number 2 and number 1 in terms of divorce rates? Just out of curiosity.
You know, I don't remember which countries they are, but it's really easy to get that information. You just Google.
Okay, got it. Okay. Divorce is on the rise for people over 50, particularly now. There's so many late term divorces, if you will. Why do you think that's happening in our culture right now?
Well, I don't know about why the later age divorces are occurring more, which they are. But I do know that the divorce rate in this country and in many other Western countries is high, because we have kind of an attitude about discarding things rather than repairing them. And that goes for relationships too. You know, I know when I was a kid, if there was a problem with an appliance or a radio or a TV, you know, if we couldn't repair it, we would get a repairman in there, and, you know, we would, you know, try to bring some life back into it. And the same thing goes for relationships. You know, I think that there's an attitude now that was not so prevalent, you know, 30, 40, 50 years ago, which is that, hey, if it ain't working, get rid of it and replace it, you know, because it's cheaper to do that. It's easier. We can afford to do it. And that same attitude applies to relationships. People don't seem to have this same interest or commitment into putting the effort, the energy, the concern into repairing relationships. And at one point or another, and it's usually at more than one point, people really do have to make a choice about, is this relationship worth repairing? And if so, what's that going to require? The go-to, the default for so many people is to just, you know, hey, let it go. It ain't working. There's a lot of other fish in the sea out there. And, you know, the illusion, and it is an illusion, that I am going to find that right person with whom I don't have these kinds of problems coming up. And you know what? More than likely than not, you're wrong about that. You know, a lot of divorced people who have gone that route have discovered, only to their surprise, that same issues.
Yeah.
I'm totally with Charlie with what he's saying about the mentality about disposable relationships. If it gets hard, just replace it with another one. But I do want to add that you mentioned people in their 50s and the spike in the divorce rate with that age group.
Mhm.
I think a lot of those people have been sticking it out in a relationship that wasn't really fulfilling on behalf of the children.
Okay.
And when the last child graduates from high school and goes off to college, they say enough. It's usually the women
Woman,
who
right?
are saying it. It's usually the women, and they have been a stand for, I'm gonna endure this. It's not really what I want, but once the children are raised, then I'm free. And they have been devoting a lot of these couples, a tremendous amount of time and effort into being excellent parents. And they haven't devoted that kind of time and effort into being excellent partners.
A great answer, a great insight. My special guests on Guys Radio today, Linda and Charlie Bloom. The new book is called An End to Arguing, 101 Valuable Lessons for All Relationships. So speaking of men and women, who argues more, men or women?
The answer is yes. An argument has to involve both people.
Okay.
And you cannot argue with somebody who is not opposing you. And I'm not answering your question directly, but I guess my indirect answer would be that we all have a tendency to want to have our view received. There are many different styles of operating. Men generally tend to make more aggressive postures, more aggressive attempts to coerce people, sometimes hostile, sometimes threatening. But women also have their preferred ways of arguing that don't necessarily seem to be quite so assertive, but they can be coercive, they can be manipulative. But the argument is really not so much about what's our style of arguing. Is it intimidation and control, or is it passive aggressiveness? It's really more about what's the intention behind what people are saying. And the intention for most of us is when we're talking to somebody with an intent to coerce them or influence them to come over to our side, that's what can become an argument. It becomes an argument when the other person has their version of what they want from us, and that both of us are coercing in our own ways the other person, trying to coerce them into adopting our view. And then we get into one of those spirals, one of those cycles where we just go down the rabbit hole, and when we do, it's really hard to dig out of it because we're both kind of locked into this pattern. So when we talk about arguments, we're talking about that dynamic, which is different than just having a difference of opinion about something.
Okay. Mm-hmm. You mentioned in the book the kind of 5 or 6 top topics, if you will, that couples argue about. And you had number 1, I was surprised by this one, tone of voice or attitude, then money, child rearing, communication style, household chores, family relationships. I would think most of those things people can talk about before they get too serious into a relationship, or be aware of, how somebody manages their money, or, family relationships, and what their style is of communication. But tone of voice or attitude, I would think that if you don't know that going into a relationship, how does that work? Where am I off base here?
I think the whole defense of denial is bigger than most people realize. And when people are falling in love and they want to have a romance and they want to partner with each other, they overlook a fair amount. They can tolerate things, and they'll proverbial sweeping things under the rug. Maybe the interruptions, maybe the tone of voice, maybe the aggressive or the passive aggressive noise, but people put it aside. They dismiss it, they overlook it, but it doesn't go away. Over time, they're accumulating. Mm-hmm. And when we call these the incompletions, when these accumulations, they've been mounting up for years, sometimes they come raining down on the couple like an avalanche. Do you know, that just got to the point where I don't feel like I want to take this anymore. And they've been overlooking and excusing and rationalizing and justifying for just too long. Mm-hmm. Do you know, they saw it, but they didn't make a big deal out of it. They didn't really deal with it at the root. And so that will catch up with them, and they have to deal with it then. But sometimes people just cut their losses. They just say, I don't want to be in this relationship anymore, and they leave. And the majority of people who get divorced don't even go to one couples counseling session, which I think is a terrible tragedy. But sometimes that's what motivates people to really take a look and get some help from counselor, read our book and there's a lot of wonderful books, and really do their homework and take the incompletions off of the pile and say, it's really been bothering me for years, this, that, or the other thing. And I feel like we need to create a new pattern, a new agreement around this, and really, no kidding, live it differently.
Sometimes it's the little things that can fester. I'll give you an example. My wife's a stickler on certain things, and I always say to myself, this is in an effort to make the relationship as good as it can be. So for instance, last night she said, the cutting board, oh, you put the cutting board, you leaned it on the top of the sink area, and if that happens, it drips in and blah, 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 whatever, some little thing. I'm like, okay, thank you. And then I hear it again, and I'm sure every guy has dealt with this. And, it could be something like that could create an argument quickly if you don't just suck it up and say, whatever. I don't bother with stuff like that. To me, I don't have the psychic bandwidth to deal with minutia like that. But for other people, it's important, and you have to respect that. Is this a typical situation where guys will think like, oh God, nitpicking me like crazy, and the men just don't want to hear it, and the woman wants to hear, yes, I've heard you, I won't do it again, or something to that, which is an acknowledgement?
No, I'm afraid you're wrong. This is the first time I've ever heard anybody complain about that. You're very unique, Robert. You're very unique.
That's true, but not in this case.
There's a little bit of sarcasm in there, but not too much.
I want to say that your wife gave you a gift. Gave you a gift when she told you that thing about the cutting board was upsetting to her. And I'm telling you that when she stops complaining, that's when you want to worry. Giving up on you, that she feels it's hopeless. There's no
That's great.
not worth bringing it up,
Mhm.
because it's so much more than the cutting board. It's showing respect, showing care, showing consideration. And so these things can look like minutia. They're not, because they're representative of when you really care about somebody. You don't want them to be irritated. You want to do everything that you can, if you can, to make their life a little easier, a little sweeter, a little bit more free-flowing. So you made a really good remark when you quoted her as being
Right.
well-intentioned. She's not being a nag. She's not being a nitpicker. She's gifting you, and you interpreted it as she doesn't want to hold this in. She wants to do this so we can have the best possible relationship that we can have. How wonderful is that? And I always tell people when they have to bring up a complaint,
Right.
sandwich it with, I'm bringing this to your attention because I don't want this to lay between us, festering, molding and marinating. I want us to have free flowing channel between us.
Here's one that I think happens with a lot of couples, is that a man and a woman will disagree on something, and the man makes his point. Usually as a guy, I was like, if something bothers me, I say it. I listen to the response. If I don't like what I hear, I just factor it in like, okay, she disagrees with me on this. If it's not a deal breaker, it's like, I was heard, we disagree. A lot of times I find that with coming from the female perspective, and I don't mean to be misogynistic or anything, is like they want to talk it through. And sometimes I'll be like, I already stated how I feel. I don't have anything new to add to this. Yet it seems like from the other side, the conversation, the point of view keeps going to like a drilling down. And I think a lot of guys fall into this type of situation where you're not sure what to do. You've stated you acknowledge you've heard it. You stated your opinion. And now, like, what else can you do? And it doesn't seem like the subject is being dropped. I'm sure you've heard this one before too.
Yeah.
Yeah, a few times.
A few thousand times.
Yeah, and I've actually been on both sides of that equation myself. Yeah, that can be really frustrating, particularly if you're convinced that, hey, I really answered your question. You know, I really gave you my best shot. You know, what more do you need now? That's the feeling. And that's actually a good question. But, you know, we talked about tone of voice. Asking it the way I just did, you know, what the hell do you need now? Is not really a question. It's a judgment.
Mhm.
You back off. You know, you shouldn't need anymore. But we all have different needs and capacities for information. And sometimes the information we need isn't just factual information. We might need emotional information. You know, like, how did you feel when that happened? Or, you know, what is it that you're needing right now? Which is a really good question.
Yes, it is.
When I find myself in that kind of a cycle on the receiving end of it, what I've learned to do when I'm frustrated with the process is just to ask Linda, so, okay, what exactly do you need from me right now? Because it's clear that there's something that you're missing, and I want to know what it is so I can see. I can't guarantee you I'll provide it, but I'll give it, you know, I'll try. But, you know, it seems like there's something more that you're looking for from me. Can you tell me more about what that might be?
And I love it when he asks me that question. I feel so valued.
I love
I'm repeating myself, and maybe he said, I heard you. I am repeating myself because I'm not certain that I really was heard.
Yeah.
That he took it in with the depth that I want him to take it in. If he puts a little bit more on the bones there, do you know, I feel really received. And then I'm a happy camper. And I'm fond of the phrase, if you don't want her to be a nag, treat her like a thoroughbred.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Great.
Isn't that cool?
It's beautiful.
And when he asked me, is there more that you need from me right now? Then I can tell him, maybe I want him to paraphrase what he heard me saying so that I really trust. This was an important point I was making. It's not just some trivial little thing, and that he really got it.
Mhm. Yeah, that seems that's a little much because then if you're a guy, you're feeling like now I have to repeat what I'm saying because you didn't catch my intention. And so I have to like say it again. It's like it's almost like you're like subservient.
Yeah, and that's particularly difficult if you're used to being in a position of authority. And, you know, when you make a request or give a demand or whatever, you're used to people saying, you know, saluting. And so, you know, I shouldn't, there's this feeling, I should not have to repeat myself. You know, I made it clear. What is your problem? And, you know, so often that is an example of tone, you know, that when you bring that attitude to it, the other person feels like you're making them wrong. You know, like I shouldn't ask any questions. I shouldn't request more. And then you can be getting into trouble, like Linda said, because if you do that enough, the other person is going to stop asking.
So Charlie, what can women do then? I mean, knowing that this is an issue with men, and if guys trying their best to say, so what you're saying is, and I understand that, and they just keep going, what can women do to be more aware of this? Like the guy gets it, stop hitting him over the head with a rolling pin, so to speak, verbally.
I call it
Good question.
economy of speech. That we need to take responsibility for distilling our message down to essence. So we're not haranguing, you know, we're not nagging, we're not boring. And when I have something important that I want to say to Charlie, I often look him right in the eye. Do you know? I make sure I have his attention. I don't speak offhandedly like when he's emptying the dishwasher. Do you know? If it's something important, I take responsibility for cueing him that this is important, what I'm communicating. So that gives him a chance to really show up, and then I don't have to repeat myself.
Got it. Okay, my special guests on Guys Radio, Linda and Charlie Bloom. We're talking about arguing and their new book, An End to Arguing, 101 Valuable Lessons for All Relationships. You mentioned a couple of provocative statements in the book. One is why choosing your battles is a bad idea. And most people think, you know, don't sweat the little stuff, but if it's something that's value-based and something really important, then it's worth to get into it. But on the little stuff, just let it go. And I think based on the earlier parts of our conversation, it seems like anything could be a trigger. So you better keep your listening hat on at all times.
Yeah, when we say better not to choose your battles, the key word there that I have a problem with is battles,
Mhm.
because it presumes that when there's a difference, there's going to be a battle. So, get your gear in place because you're going to need to fight here. So it's not just a matter of semantics, but we have associations with certain words. And what we're really talking about, and I think we make this pretty clear in the chapter, is that when you phrase something as a battle, you're going to provoke a certain kind of a response. So you can make choices, and we encourage people to choose what is it that really matters to you, what is it that has significance, that is worth taking a stand for, and what is it that you can live with, what's not quite so important. And so we're not saying whenever your partner has a different position that it's really better just to accommodate them, but it is important to be discerning enough to know when to take a stand, and to do that, take that stand in a way that is respectful, as opposed to controlling with them, and to be discerning about that.
Mhm. Now, going back to an earlier point, sometimes guys don't want to talk about things. How do we deal with that? The scenario where sometimes, like as I said, if I have a problem, I bring it up. If I don't have a problem, you can assume I'm happy. I think a lot of guys are that way. I'm not trying to generalize, but I've been around long enough to kind of get the vibe on that. How do we deal with that in terms of couples, where sometimes a guy doesn't want to talk about something, where something comes up and it's not on their radar?
I will speak to it first. Charlie will probably have a
Please.
different view. If anybody that I care about says, I'm not talking about it, I feel very shut out. I feel abandoned. I feel devalued. It's a trigger for me. If they can say that's a very difficult subject for me, and at least give me some information about why they don't want to talk about it, why it's a hot topic for them, why they feel like they've already gone on the record and that they've made their viewpoint known. But if they give me a hard boundary, it's offensive. If they can say a little something, they don't have to necessarily go in depth or violate their own privacy or whatever their issue is. But it's like a softer boundary, a more courteous and respectful boundary. And that means a lot to me. I don't insist, that if people speak to me about the things that are a little too edgy for them. And it's also encouraging if I hear there may be a time when I feel like I could discuss this with you in more depth, but I'm not there right now. Do you see that there's something very kind of
Absolutely.
loving about that?
It seems like there's a theme from your guidance, if you will, throughout, is that if we are mindful, if we are living in the moment and we are mindful and kind to the other person, it can avoid a lot of these obstacles, a lot of these arguments, by just being present, being mindful, and having what you call in the book committed listening. Talk to us about
It
that.
makes all the difference in the world. And
Yep.
people say, I love you. And then they're, triggered by things, and I don't want to talk about it, and you can't make me, and you always do this. And they're not acting in a loving way. So if we're committed to creating a loving partnership, my definition of love it's just a feeling, it's an action that shows our devotion to the person. And especially with these gnarly subjects where we get triggered, that is just the place to be able to show how much we love them.
Now, you touched on a point. I want to bring it up because sometimes, and I don't say this is for men or for women, but people bring up the past. And for me, that's very annoying, because if you had something in the past and you went through it, now you're here. And it never helps a situation to bring up something in the past, because if you haven't resolved it then, and up till this point, it's being used as a club. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you made a reference earlier to mindfulness and to being present, because when we are present, what we're communicating is from a very different place than when we're recalling a past situation. And when we're present, and we're speaking from what's true for me right now in this moment, it doesn't mean that we won't be talking about something from the past, because there could be something from the past that is activating a certain feeling within us that we might have to make a reference to. But the thing about recalling and speaking from the past is that almost inevitably we're going to have a very different recollection of that past moment than our partner does.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost inevitable that what I thought, or what I'm sure that you did or said then, is different than what you did, what you're thinking. So we're setting ourselves up for an inevitable argument most of the time when we go back and reference the past and use that as evidence of something that I'm trying to justify in the present, which is why we distort it. When we recall it, we're bringing a distorted perception, a distorted memory that has been influenced by our attachment to our wanting to be right about something. And so when we can be present with our current experience, that's something that nobody can, I mean, they can try to argue with it. They can try to make us wrong with it. But if I say, when you said that, I really felt threatened, or I really felt happy when you said that. It made me feel this way. I mean, you can't invalidate. You can try to invalidate somebody's memory of something, but you can't invalidate somebody's present experience. I'm feeling grateful right now. I'm feeling confused right now. I'm feeling scared right now. I'm feeling whatever it is, that is information that cannot be invalidated. So it's really helpful to be mindful, to be present enough to be aware of what I'm feeling, and to focus on getting in touch with that and expressing that, because that will generate a whole different kind of an environment with the person with whom you're speaking than it will, for us to get back into that whole focus on, here's what you did, or here's what's wrong with you.
As part of that, just a follow-up, you mentioned trust and rebuilding trust, and that's always a challenge to repair trust, depending on the situation. But if it was something about, cheating, and there's different types of cheating that go on in relationships, for a lot of times for a guy, if it's the woman does something physically with somebody else, that's cheating. For a lot of times for a woman, if the guy does something physical or even emotionally intimate, that's something that's cheating also. So this issue of trust, how can it be repaired, to your point, Charlie, if we don't want to bring up the past?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's really difficult to do the kind of repair that's necessary if you've got a can't bring up the past clause. Yeah, if it's still alive, emotionally alive, even if it could be years old. I always say when we teach our classes, there's no statute of limitations on incompletions. Live in this moment, and it's not complete, and it's still laying heavy on your heart. It needs another go round, or a few more go rounds. But the intention makes all the difference. If you bring it up to make the other person bad and wrong, to club them with it, and you're still doing these awful things that you've been doing them for years, that is not going to lead to any good repair. It's not going to be trust building. If you bring it up with the intention of, we want to learn together, what were the circumstances that gave rise to this? We weren't as awake and aware at the time that we made these choices. The choice to do the thing that caused harm, and the choice to bury it for a while. And we're stronger now. And we're holding a higher golden standard for our relationship now. We don't want this messy stuff to contaminate our relationship. Can't we just bring this old piece of news up because it's still got a charge for me and examine it with an intention to learn from it, repair our damaged relationship, and have a sturdier trust now?
Mhm. Are there ways to be, based on everything we've discussed, proactive ways that you could recommend to our audience to avoid conflict, knowing when the top topics are tone of voice, attitude, money, child rearing, communication style, household responsibilities and chores, and family relationships? Are there some things, and I know it's kind of a broad stroke question, that ways we can be proactive so we can avoid getting into these, we can avoid having disagreements that are inevitable turn into arguments?
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's no way that you can avoid having disagreements because we're all programmed differently. We're all wired differently. We have different personalities. We have different perspectives. We have different histories. So there's going to be, there are going to be inevitably times when we have a different take on things. And so, like you said at the very beginning, Robert, when we were speaking, that it's really about how do we prevent these inevitable disagreements from deteriorating into conflicts. And one of the ways is to look more at how I am responding to this person rather than keeping the focus on, which is what we do. The focus is on the other person and trying to influence them to come over to our side. But what a concept. I mean, to really look at me and look at how am I responding to what I'm experiencing right now in this moment, going back to the whole question of mindfulness. So you and I are having a conversation and you present a point of view that does not fit with my perspective. And my intention, and it's kind of built into most of us, is to try to get you to see things differently, because that makes me feel more secure. That kind of reaffirms what I want to be right about. But what if we look into ourselves and say, well, wow, how did I feel when he said that? And can I look more, instead of looking at how can I get him to see it differently, can I look at more at myself to see how can I respond to that without being threatening, without
Personal.
activating his defensiveness? You know, how can I respond to that? What do I need to do in order to fulfill my intention in this conversation, which hopefully is for both of us to have a better understanding of each other? You know, I don't have to agree with your conclusion about the best way to deal with this, but if I can understand exactly how you came to view it that way, I'm not going to be as likely to see you as an adversary. I'm not going to be as likely to see you as an opponent. I'm more likely to see you as, okay, we're both looking at this situation and we both have our ideas about the correct way to view it, the correct thing to do. And how can I assert or communicate my perspective and explain how I came to that conclusion? And how can I invite that person to do the same thing with me? So it's shifting the intention from getting you to see it my way to looking at myself to see how can I express myself in a way that you might understand me, and how can I support you to communicate to me the same way.
It's more about it's less about winning and more about understanding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. The 3 words that you say don't use in these arguments, what are they?
You're being defensive. If they weren't being
God, I hate you.
before, they will be dead, because them's fighting words. Do you know? And people don't want to be judged. You're already in trouble when you use the word you. You're getting off on a bad foot. You want to stay with your own experience as much as possible. You want to speak about what you're feeling. You especially want to speak about your vulnerable feelings. If you're feeling afraid, if you're feeling disconnected and lonely, if you're feeling hurt. And I think it's so hard for a lot of people to stay in their vulnerability. So they stay with the irritation and the resentment and the anger, and sometimes rage. But underneath that anger, there's always these vulnerable feelings of fear and hurt. When people can drop down, they have a different kind of a conversation, and it takes a lot of courage to do it.
Awesome. I got to tell you, if I wanted to go to a marriage counselor, relationship counselor, I'd go to you two. Do you guys work together when you work with
Yes,
people?
we often
Or is
do.
it, okay.
We often see couples together
Okay.
because they want to hear the female point of view and the male point of
Got it.
view.
Mhm.
They want to hear we're very different in many ways. I'm the planner. I'm the form and structure. He's Mr. Spontaneity.
Mhm.
And they sometimes really need to know that you can be very different and you can still have a splendid, harmonious relationship. It requires work. They need to take time and effort away from family, responsibilities with children and professional responsibilities with career development and all the things that people are involved with to really devote to the relationship being a gold standard kind of a relationship. And we are always telling people about check-in regularly. Check in with yourself and check in with your partner. You can head off so much trouble at the pass if you stay connected with each other on a regular basis. Minimum of once a week, every day is even better.
Well, as an example of success in relationships and knowing how to deal with disagreements, and I'm sure some arguments over the year, you guys have been married since 1972 and going strong, and I congratulate you. I think it's fantastic, and especially as you mentioned, so many things are disposable nowadays. I mean, jobs, people don't, my dad worked for the same company for 45 years. People rarely do that nowadays. Same thing with relationships. We're always jumping around one thing to the other. So God bless you. Congratulations. The name of the book is An End to Arguing, 101 Valuable Lessons for All Relationships. My special guests, Linda and Charlie Bloom. Tell everybody where they can learn more about you and get your book.
Bloomwork, BLOOMWORK.com, not Bloomworks, Bloomwork. And when you go to our website, we got all kind of free stuff there. We got videos and we got blogs, several hundred blogs and free ebooks. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's one about sexuality, there's one about arguing, and there's one about the 10 most important things we've learned since we got married. Also on our website, there are classes. We're going to be teaching love, sex, and intimacy on the East Coast at Kripalu in Massachusetts, and we teach regularly in Big Sur at Esalen Institute. And here in the San Francisco Bay Area, up in Berkeley, we're going to be teaching love, sex, and rock and roll in the fall. So people can find out where they can do a class with us too.
Amazing. I think love, sex, and rock and roll. Maybe we have another show coming up. So anyway. So great to see you guys again, and you're doing terrific work, and bless you, and keep going. Thank you for being here.
What you do in the world too. Thanks for helping getting the word out.
Thanks a lot.
If you enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week to Guys TV and Guys Radio, please support us by subscribing to our channels and platforms. Thank you.